Winter Soldier. Yay! I'm sorry, Winter Soldier Cold Front. Please join me in welcoming our dear friend back for a third time,
Yay.
Mackenzi Lee. Woo!
Happy to be back.
I'm so happy you're here.
It's a home away from home at this point. As you were talking, I was looking up at all the cute little quotes and all the signatures, and it's a nice place to be.
Thank you. It's very nice to have you here, and you look fabulous.
Thank you.
Can we talk fashion later?
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
good, because I have questions.
Always. Wait,
so-
I have a question.
Yes.
Because this also just like being on the news.
Yes.
Do I look into the camera? Do I look at you?
You do.
I look at
You can do all of it.
Oh.
Whatever, but like, at some point you can talk there, but sometimes you can look at the audience, and when you and I are talking, we can look at each other.
I'll try not to overthink this.
So I know, don't, because that's what we have done in the past. Like sometimes I'll talk to you, sometimes I'll talk to the camera, sometimes I'll talk to the audience.
Okay.
It does not all have to happen within like a 15-second
I
period.
just look at the ceiling the whole time.
You know what? Just close your eyes.
Off, yeah.
Do the whole thing with your eyes closed. We're going to be great.
That's going to be the way.
Mackenzi, you obviously know this, but I am a huge Mackenzi Lee fan, but I'm not that informed about Marvel, as we've discussed. So since I am more of a Mackenzi Lee fan than a Marvel fan, how do I find a toehold
In this book?
in this book?
So, I mean, I was gonna say the other person you have that in common with is my mother, but her toehold in this book is primarily like parental pride. So you can draft off that a little bit if
you
you'd
know what,
like
and
to.
you know what? I will answer it actually for you, because the banter.
I was gonna say banter. I was going to say it's a zippy. I have a zippy particular kind of dialogue that I write.
You do.
Where when I go back and edit my first drafts, I'm always like, okay, we got to take three of these quips out. We got to pick our favorite of these four. And there's the strong historical bend to it, right? When Marvel approached me about this project, they sort of said, we want to do 3 books about anti-heroes in the Marvel universe. We wanted to see them as teenagers, so kind of earlier than we've seen them in their timelines,
right?
Both comics and movies. And we want to have a historical sensibility to each of them, which is why they sort of specifically came to me. So the first one, Loki's in 1890s Victorian England, solving these sort of like Jack the Ripper-esque murders. The second one is Gamora and Nebula from Guardians of the Galaxy, not historical per se, but it's a space Western. It's very much drafting off like 1800s America, Manifest Destiny, all of that. And then this one is dual timeline World War II in 1941, and which Kathy is enjoying a lot, and Cold War Russia 1954, which is ruining her life.
It's making me very sad. I am very sad.
Yeah, Kathy's the only person who went into this book not knowing anything, and it's going to be, she's the only one for which the surprise reveal in this book is actually going to be a surprise.
It's going to kill me at the end. And it's making me very sad. I'm like having this existential dread when I pick it up, but I'm loving it.
They're grim books, which was a departure for me, because
right?
The Montagues, like I went so out of my way, and that's not, it's part of my like, my pitch for the book is I'm like, you don't have to be worried that there are historical gays. Nobody's going to die or get like left on a beach somewhere. They're going to end up to get like, I don't even want that to be a spoiler, because I don't want people to be reading it with this feeling of dread we've all been conditioned to have when we talk about historical gays.
Right.
And these, it's like the opposite, where it's like, no, it doesn't end good for anybody. Bucky Barnes will never be happy.
Because he's so happy.
I know he's having a great time in World War II. That sounds very strange.
I know.
Having the most fun anyone's had in World War II.
Anyway, since you alluded to the grim,
yeah,
why don't you read the prologue?
Yeah. So this is the prologue, which means you need zero context for this. This is when you open it up. And can I make a quick note?
You can.
This book is dedicated to my friend's dog, among other people. So it's dedicated to my little like COVID pod that I spent most of 2001, what year is it? 2020, 2021 with. And my friend Mikkel, who's one of the dedicatees of the book, has this dog named Chief. He's a black lab collie hybrid with amber eyes. We call him the Hound with the amber eyes. And he and Queenie, my dog, love each other. But Chief came to her damaged. We don't know what happened to him in his younger and more vulnerable years, as with many rescue dogs. And he's an exuberant, lovely dog. And then every once in a while, it's like his Soviet sleeper, somebody says the code phrase, And he like fully will be like sitting there and we're all like having a great time. And out of nowhere, he'll just like growl and go at Queenie's throat. And we all just kind of sit there and like, oh my God. And then Chief will like be like, hey guys, what happened? Why is everyone weird? Why is there blood on the snow? And so we started joking when I was working on the book. I was like, he's like Bucky Barnes, where you like, or he's like the Winter Soldier, where you like say the code words and he like, snapped into his programming. And then like 2 minutes later, yeah, he's fine and he's normal. So the book is dedicated to my friend's dog. And I'm very charmed by that. And I would like everyone else to be
I
charmed
am now equally charmed.
by my friend's Soviet sleeper agent Manchurian candidate rescue dog. Okay, here we go. When you wake, the only thing you remember is dying. The crack of the ice as your body struck it, louder than anti-aircraft fire. The cold that drove all the breath from your lungs. The water that flooded them when you gasped in shock. You had fallen hard but landed weightless, the world going white around you as you floated. Too cold to swim, too cold to breathe, too cold to do anything but die. You don't know how, but you were certain you were dying. It had always been different before, that you can't remember what exactly that before looked like. Before, you had flirted with death like a drunk at a bar, reckless and giddy, but with no intention of following it home. You had stood on the knife's edge, sucked last chance after last chance to the bone. They had been endless until they weren't. But you aren't dead, are you? So then what is this? Your eyes are crusted shut, and when you crack them open, the light burns. Spectral clouds dot the corners of your vision, fog gathered and made flesh. Here are the ghosts coming to collect you. You can't recall their names. But surely you had a mother and father once. Perhaps it's them beckoning you over the threshold with hands outstretched. Maybe a friend who didn't survive childhood. Doesn't everyone have one of those? The first time you learned that people really die, and the thing to fear is not the loss, but the losing. Maybe the ghosts are soldiers. You remember soldiers. Maybe it's them, your band of brothers gone into the deep, frigid water before you, now waiting on the other side. The ghosts wear white caps and their faces are covered. You can't see their eyes, just the light overhead reflected in them. It refracts through the glass bottles hanging above you, long tubes snaking down from them like kite tails before disappearing under your skin. You can feel their contents draining into you, and your body seizes against the added weight. Your chest constricts, a spasm like those raised by the cold. Suddenly, you're back in the water. You're afraid, but you don't know why. You want to fight, but you don't know what. You're not sure you could, even if you tried. Your limbs don't feel like your own. Your whole body is a foreign landscape, treacherous in its strangeness. There's pain in places that don't exist, weakness in muscles that never relax. The water is gone, but the cold remains. What is your name? A ghost asks. You can't see your legs, but you try to move them, and it's like trying to break through a shell of thick ice. Do you understand me? The ghost asks, and you do. You understand him, but you still can't move your legs. You try your arms, but only one of them obeys. Your fist closes and opens and closes again. Is it yours? A fist? A hand? You try to look, but something holds your head in place and the light is still in your eyes. You want to stand. You always thought you'd die on your feet, rising to meet the bullet, but here you are, drowning in light and full of water with nothing but a hand that isn't yours. What's your name? The ghost asks again, and you know the answer, but don't say it, you think, and you clench your jaw until you feel the pain. Your whole body trembles with the effort it takes not to speak, to keep your head above water, to keep your head above the current when it would be so much easier to give in and let yourself sink. Almost finished, the ghost says, and you feel the soothing press of fingers against your forehead, pushing back your hair. Someone else had done that once. Someone else had touched your hair with tenderness, but when you reach for the memory, there's only empty air. You can feel the absence of whoever once occupied that space inside you. It steals your breath, the enormity of that chasm. Your heartbeat stutters, the tremor echoing in a rising electronic beat. Tell me your name, the ghost says. The ice cracks under you. The water funnels in, frothing and studded with glacial ice, and you can't fight it. You can't swim. You can't wait on a tide that will never turn, and it's not just water as far as you can see, it's farther. It's all that's left. Through a mouthful of cold water, you gasp your reply, gagging at each word like it's a sharp-edged fractal of frost. I don't know. Good, the ghost replies. Good, that's perfect.
Right? Imagine the person in the back, she's all sad too.
It's only 3 pages in.
I know, and that is one of the things, is the tension between the tone that you set. So how steeped were you in Marvel before you began these projects?
I was a moderate nerd. So as a kid, I was a nerd before it was cool to be a nerd. Like now you can walk into Target and there's Star Wars stuff, and
right?
like 9-year-old me would have lost her mind. I was like digging through discount toy bins for Jar Jar Binks action figure. Like it wasn't a good time to be a young nerd, especially a young female nerd.
Amen.
There was no place for
right?
you. And I remember wanting to read comics and wanting to like comic books and going into, there was a comic book store by my grandma's house that I remember going in and it's like all surly middle-aged men staring at me like you don't belong here. And I was like, I know. And I like knew the characters. I knew who Spider-Man was, and so I would like, oh, there's a Spider-Man, and I would pick it up and look at it and be like, oh, so we're in the middle of a story. I don't know who any of these characters are. I don't know how to read this. I don't know what an issue is or a volume. How do I read? Like, I had no comic book literacy and just couldn't figure out how to access these stories. And then when the Marvel movies started coming out, as with many people, suddenly we all have this sort of equal footing. We all have this like this same established knowledge of who these characters are. We all have our access point. And then there were comics and books and things that were coming out of those. And we were all, it felt like we were on more even footing. You didn't have to know the 100 years of history. You could start sort of where the movies started. And that was my access point. And the first comic books I really got into were the Ed Brubaker run of the Winter Soldier, which are like these they're great comic books, but they're great books. Like they're very Cold War spy pastiche. They feel kind of like John le Carré, but with like giant apes. Like it's Jean le Carré wrote for Marvel. Like that's what it feels like. And they're wonderful. And I really, really loved them. And I really loved specifically the Winter Soldier and the character.
So that was your first.
That was my first comic books I got really into. And so it does feel like a full circle moment when they gave me the contract. It was Loki and then undetermined second and third book. And they were sort of like, we'll reevaluate as we go based on who's like popping off and what's in the shows and what there's a fan response to, which is why Nebula and Gamora happened, is because they both really like those characters really popped from Infinity War and Endgame in a way that I think they kind of hadn't before, and especially their relationship with Thanos. And so we had sort of started talking about maybe doing a Star-Lord book, and then those movies came out and I was like, what if we didn't just write about white guys? And so we pivoted into Gamora Nebula, and then Marvel pitched me for the third one. They were like, we got a great idea for your third one. We want you to write an Ant-Man book. I was like, no. They were like, okay, we got a better idea. What about Hawkeye? And I was like, no. And so I pitched back Elena from Black Widow's sister, Elena Belikova, I think is her last name. And they didn't love that idea because Margie Stoll did her Black Widow series, and I think they were worried about things getting crossed. And then I pitched Winter Soldier as sort of a like, if you don't want me to do this, that's fine, but I will push really, really hard for this. And it took a little bit, but we got there. And it's here, and now it exists, and it's so cool. It's like a cool thing to. They've all been cool, but this one for me is the most like surreal and special to get to do.
It makes me so happy.
Yeah.
So all three of these are anti-heroes.
Yes.
What fascinates you about an anti-hero?
The fact that we are all anti-heroes. Like, if any of us were the main characters of a book, we would all be labeled unlikable protagonists. We all, and I think we all want to read about characters, because we want to read about people like us, and that extends to the fact that sometimes we want to read about characters who like make the wrong decisions and who are going to give in to like their pride and their selfishness and not always like there's just something not as interesting in terms of reading about a character like Captain America, who's like his defining thing is his like moral unambiguity, a character that keeps you on your toes, and you never quite know whose best interest they're going to be acting in. And there's like the real chance that they could actually screw everything up and turn on everybody and disappoint you, I guess. I think it's exciting as a reader, but also it's unfortunately relatable as a reader, because we all do that. As Taylor Swift wrote,
like it's running through my head right now. As soon as I said it, I'm like,
this hasn't been an issue with any of the other events, and now suddenly,
no, that's it.
All I want to do is sing.
I know, me too. Maybe we can do it later.
Yeah, we'll do karaoke.
Yeah, we will.
A few drinks.
Absolutely. The time periods, and I don't know if my sister is watching, but this is her question because she's a massive Mackenzi Lee fan. The time periods and genres that you've written are very different.
Yes.
Do you have connection points between any of them?
In terms of like, do I know stuff going in, or
any kind of answer?
So I was a history major. I wanted to be a history professor. I was going to do the full PhD. And I see you've probably heard me tell this story. You probably haven't. You probably haven't.
Tell it anyway. It's a good story.
And I went to the UK to study specifically. I think I say to you like, I was a historian. I wanted to be a historian, and then a lot of people go, oh, well, then you have all the research for these books. I was like, no. I wanted to be a historian specifically of women during the Wars of the Roses. So I wanted to study this like specific 20-year period in the 1400s in England, and specifically the social history of women at the time. So it has nothing to do with like World War II. And I had a professor there I was working with who this was her specialty, and she was very smart and very interesting. And I wanted to impress her so badly. And she scored my papers very, very low. And I finally went and like conference with her. And I was like, so what am I doing wrong? And she's like, you can't write dialogue for Richard III. You can't write scenes of Henry in your like academic papers. You can't write scenes of Henry V like pacing the battlefield. And I was like, but that is how I would like to write this. She was like, then maybe we need to think about writing something else. So which is how I pivoted then into doing historical fiction. And historical fiction is like what made me interested in history. It was sort of all these, I read a ton of books when I was a kid about like plucky young girls who put on pants and get on a tall ship in the 1800s. Like that was my preferred genre. And that was really what made me interested in history. So it's kind of coming full circle. But in terms of the access points into the books, my access point is always just like, I'm deeply curious about all things historical. And I want to find, I want to do the research. Like I want to do the work. I want to take years before I ever start writing and just learn a lot, or learn a little bit about a lot of different things concerning these time periods. And also just want to like be paralyzed for several months by how totally overwhelmed I feel by everything I don't know about. World War II might be the most spectacularly intimidating one I've done so far, because everybody knows just like the base knowledge of World War II is so much higher. And the people who like are interested in World War II are really interested in World War II. Yes. And there's so many more, like just the fact that there are photographs from that time period, which is the thing I never had to contend with Gentleman's Guide. It's like, you can't look up like what a picture of clothes of houses. I mean, you can look at what we think they would have looked like, or sort of artifacts from the time, but it's very different to have these actual photographs of the things that were happening. And people are, the one good thing about doing the World War II was, it has sort of the Marvel veneer over it. So anything that doesn't quite match up with history, I'm like, no, that's where the Marvel bit comes in. They're superheroes.
So how does it, since these are they are Marvel properties.
They are. Look, they got the official
they got the little Marvel
thing on the front.
Yeah.
Can I tell a quick story about how unhinged the internet is?
Yes.
I recently was accused of being a nepotism baby, because clearly I was a descendant of Stan Lee. So Lee's not my real last name, first of all.
Right, I know. Like,
second of all, if I was a Stan Lee nepotism baby, I am the worst nepotism baby of all time. If Marvel is my lineage, why would I pick a job writing mid-tier YA novels for peanuts? I would be directing the MCU. Thank you. I was mostly just offended by the implication that I was so bad at being a Nepo baby. I was related to Stanley, and all I got was like a mid-tier publishing contract.
Internet. Internet. So I'm assuming that Marvel gives you some sort of either structure or like handbook.
Weirdly little.
Really?
Yeah.
With all three?
Yes. I fully went into these expecting that they were going to give me like a synopsis and be like, you can make up the name of the restaurant they visit, but here's the rest of it. And they gave me so much freedom with all of them. The first one was kind of like, the first one was sort of a weird process because it was the acquiring book, and my editor like she brought me on for the project and then immediately left, and I was sort of editorless for a while. And I ended up, my only editors were like 12 Marvel executives arguing in the comments with each other about like whether there's electricity in Asgard. And I'm like, okay, also this book doesn't have a story structure. Like, can someone help me with that? So the first one was weird and fraught. But for the second one, I had like the editor of my heart, like my favorite editor I've ever, sorry if anyone else I've worked with is listening, but like Emily like felt like my creative person. And so coming in, she was like, we're going to fly you out to California, and I want you to meet with all the Marvel team, and let's talk about it, and let's talk from the start. Because the other thing too, the problem with the first Loki one was that I didn't synopsize as detailed as I should. And so some stuff got sort of like verbally approved, and then it's a whole thing. Anyways, so she's like, we're going to make sure from the get-go, everybody's on board with everything. So I like came to California and like did a vibes presentation essentially, where I was like, I would like to write a space Western for Gamora and Nebula. Here's a Pinterest board. Here's a clip from Mad Max Fury Road. Here's a song from Hades Town. Like, here's all these things I love that I would like to incorporate. And then there's this room full of Marvel people so I like mentioned in the thing, I was like, one of the things I'd like to explore in the like Western themes, I want to talk about fanatical religion, and how these sort of like religious zealots preyed on vulnerable people in the Old West, and how that can sort of be like in a place with no hope, how people can come and exploit that. And one of the guys who was at the table, this guy called Sven, who I had emailed with and was very disappointed to learn he was not a cartoon reindeer. He was like, okay, well, have you thought about the Universal Church of Truth? And I was like, I don't know what that is. And he's like, okay, so Gamora and Nebula actually interact in Marvel with this sort of like megalomaniac organization called the Universal Church of Truth. You can look into Adam Warlock, who's their leader. You can look into, here, let me send you. And then he would like send me comic books and be like, and so they do have some kind of archivist or historian or something at Marvel that I had access to, and I could email and say like, I want to write about the Universal Church of Truth. And they'd send me like essentially encyclopedia pages. And then also like, here's a list of every time the Universal Church of Truth appears in Marvel comics or in Marvel media.
Cool.
Let us know if you want excerpts or if you want comic books or anything. So like Nebula and Gamora, we talked a lot about Universal Church of Truth. We talked about the Grand Master. We talked about Thanos has this thing that got left out of the movies for understandable reasons, which is his like weird relationship with a personified version of death that only he can see, who's like his only friend growing up.
Your
And
bracelet,
I know,
jewelry
it's
is
really,
making me think of Thanos.
okay, well it is, it's the Infinity Stone, it's the Infinity Stone.
This is how little
I was like, it's very distracting,
but I
jewelry.
still love this book.
It's distracting me even as I'm gesturing way more than usual.
And the audience is like, how can you not?
I know, everyone.
I apologize, friends.
I mean, it's fashion, whether or not you know that
It
it's
is,
referencing,
because
let's
you're
be
so
honest.
stylish. It looks so cool.
Thank you. But yeah, you're fine. You're doing great. All of that to say, so they sort of like gave me a ton of information, and then I wrote a synopsis and sent it to them, and they gave me feedback on it, and then I expanded it
So
from like
cool.
a 1-page synopsis to a 10-page synopsis. And it really was so cool because I got to bring in so much stuff that I was interested in, and I really got to personalize these books. And like there were some things in Gamora and Nebula that like I shouldn't keep talking about that book. I should talk about this one. But I also, that came out in the pandemic and I never got to talk about it. But like Gamora and Nebula, I remember talking to them about like one of the things when I read sci-fi, I find that I always default to men in my brain. Like whenever there's like a scene of extras, my brain just fills it in with men. And I was like, I want to go out of my way in this book to only have sort of women filling the background, not as like a thing. I don't want it to be like a thing in the book. I just want it to be like sort of challenging these ideas we have who belongs in sci-fi novels. And they were super supportive of that. And so I got to do little stuff like that. And this, I mean, Winter Soldier happened very similarly in that I said I came in hot saying I want to do dual timelines. Like that was my pitch with Bucky Barnes. I want to do one in 1941, one in 1954. Eventually they intersect. Like if you're in on the joke from the start, it's fine, but also you have this sort of like inception
And if you're
point.
not, it's going to break your heart.
Surprise. And they were super open to that. Like,
that's so
from
cool.
the get-go. And yeah, it was an incredibly cool thing to get to do, and to also like be able to stretch myself creatively in these books that I think IP can sometimes, in the intellectual property where you're writing for a big conglomerate, can sometimes feel kind of like the author is the least important person. They want you to sort of disappear into the property that you're writing about. And Marvel was really great about, they were like, no, we hired you to write these books. We want you to write these books.
So happy for you.
It was great. I was pleasantly surprised pretty much the whole way down by how much I got to actually put my stamp on these books.
Well, and that's why when I'm reading this, it feels like I'm reading Mackenzi Lee.
It hopefully, good to
which
hear.
is no, but it does.
That
like,
was the goal.
No, but I love how they've come together.
Thank you.
And I'm very frightened to keep.
Thank you. I'm thrilled with them.
So I don't know if the audience knows or if the audience online knows. Oh, by the way, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A. But Mackenzi is also an amazing indie bookseller, in addition to being an author, which is how we often interact.
Yeah.
I like remember during I watched you you did a beautiful Winter Institute presentation. I remember I
did
like
so long ago.
Mackenzi. So how does being an indie bookseller and being author, how does one inform the other? Does one inform the other?
Yes, very much, which is that so being an author is fun about 5% of the time. Mostly it's terrible. And mostly it's terrible because I spend so much time, and I shouldn't do this. None of us should do this, and yet we all do, which is you spend so much time sitting on social media looking at other people's book deals and other people's marketing, and so-and-so's going to this conference and look at their event turnout. And also I'm like, nobody else is feeling as down or as dumb or as unread as I am. And you just sit and you find 1,000 ways to compare yourself to other people and find yourself lacking. If you're me anyway. I'm sure other people have the opposite experience, but I'm not one of them. And then when I'm in the bookstore though, and I'm talking to people in the bookstore, I remember that readers don't care about that kind of thing. Like you have people who come in and they're like, oh, I want the New York Times book review book, or I want the book I saw advertised on the subway. But in general, they come in and they just want to talk to you about books you love and books they love. And the range of books people love is as wide as the range of people there are.
Yeah.
And you really realize that every book is somebody's favorite book. And every book is like that. Write that down. Every book is like the way I feel about my favorite books. My book is that for somebody else. Every book is that for somebody else. And you realize that all that, like the marketing stuff and the social media and the TikTok and whatever is such it puts things in perspective for me and reminds me like why I do the job I do as a writer. And also the real conversations that are driving book sales and the things that really make the difference, which is that somebody is out there like passionately talking about your book to somebody, and your book has influenced somebody's life in the way that all my favorite books have influenced mine. So it's honestly, book selling also just like I did like a year after I got out of grad school of temping at a publishing house. And that just like sucked my soul. It did the opposite. It was like too close. It was like, now I see how when you're literally breaking down books and they're like, we don't care what's in the book. We just want to know what the dimensions are and what color the cover is and how to look on a shelf. And it's like, oh God, this is the worst. And book selling does the opposite, where I feel like revived and energized in a way when I leave the bookstore and go back to work, because it's a good thing to keep things in perspective. I would recommend every author be a bookseller if possible. Yeah. It just really, it reminds you why you do the thing you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. You also have a beautiful dog who you discussed when you discussed the dedication.
Yeah. She is in
How's
the dedication.
She doing?
She's good. She's staying with my neighbor right now. This is the second or third time she stayed with this neighbor. And this is the first time it hasn't been major trauma, because I found the way to drop her off, because so she doesn't have to. We tried me sneaking out, which was bad, because then she was like frantically looking around the house for me. Not the answer.
And she's not a small dog.
No, she's 150-pound Saint Bernard. So yeah.
Named Queenie.
Named Queenie. And so can't sneak out. And then the second time I did it, I like tried like looking her in the eye the whole time. I was like, I am leaving. You're staying here with these people you love and these other dogs you love. You will be fine. Also not a great idea. She like tried to like Kool-Aid man her way out the door after me, which is not great. This time though, we nailed it, which is I dropped her off last night at Katie's house, and they were eating pizza at the time. So Queenie immediately runs to their outdoor table and was like sitting, staring at the pizza. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go. Queenie, you want to walk me to the door? And she's like, no, I got to watch this pizza. And apparently she didn't even notice I left. And then apparently, but she like saw me leave, but didn't notice I left. And then when the pizza was consumed, she was sort of like, here was my mom, and then went to bed and now has been totally fine. So she's
have a pizza on a table.
Pizza. It's the pizza method apparently. But yeah, she's great. She comes to work with me at the bookstore. I'm now living and working in Los Angeles at a bookstore where we have a fair amount of celebrity clientele. So she's made good friends with Molly Shannon is a big fan of Queenie's. Queenie sat in the back room with her while she signed her memoirs, which was possibly, I mean, it was partly due to the fact that Molly really loves her, and also partly due to the fact that somebody had recently thrown away a bag full of tacos in that back room. Who can say which was a stronger factor? But we just, I was sitting with a friend working at this cafe a couple weeks ago with Queenie. She was just like sitting sprawled out on the patio. This very, very beautiful woman sat down next to us and began speaking in a British accent, so posh it felt fake. And I kind of like eyeballed her. I was like, I think that's Daphne from Bridgerton. And then her scone was delivered to her table, and Queenie immediately was like, scone, ding, ding, ding. Everyone else has finished their food at my table. And she starts like snuffling around, and I was like, I'm so sorry. And Daphne from Bridgerton stops her conversation. She's like, oh, she's gorgeous. What a gorgeous creature. She's just the loveliest dog I've ever seen. And it took all of my self-control to not go, would you say she's the diamond of the season? And then my friend, and I was like, and then we sat down, and my friend who was sitting across from me like DM'd me. She was like, that's the Bridgerton girl, right? I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the Bridgerton girl.
Okay,
so
that's hilarious.
It's my celebrity stuff.
That's fantastic. So on that note, we had a customer at the store months and months ago, and I said, what is your last name? And she said, Hastings. I'm like, oh, like the Duke of Hastings. And she's staring at me. I'm like, isn't that from Bridgerton? And the woman behind her's like, kind. But again,
not everyone's cool enough to get our reference.
Not if it's okay. but it's a great reference and it made me super happy. Ellie, is there a question from the audience?
Yes, Elena was wondering, what was your favorite thing you learned while researching for this book?
Oh, we should probably talk about this book instead of about my diamond of the season.
That's
Every event I do, I just want to talk about Queenie.
But so, yeah, that's a good question.
The
Thanks,
favorite thing
Elena.
the favorite thing I researched. So I read a lot about MK Ultra and the sort of mind control experiments that went on during the Cold War. Some of which have since been declassified, some of which have remained sort of speculative, but basically about real experiments the CIA and the KGB were doing on some unsuspecting members of the population to figure out like to create sleeper agents essentially that could then be activated with a certain word or phrase, and this idea of like infiltrating foreign society. And that was super interesting. I'm trying to remember, I can see the cover of the book. It's red and it's got a big eye on it. Dark Persuasion maybe was a book about mind control experiments through history. I think I might be making that one up. I was really fascinated by that. Thought that was super interesting. The 1941 storyline, Bucky ends up he goes on the run with a teenage chess champion. And I read a lot about chess and still don't really totally understand it. I like did all this reading about chess and like bought a chessboard, was like figuring stuff out on the board. And I was like, I am probably great at chess now because I have read extensively about it. And my dad, who's like, I would say a beginning to moderate chess player, loves chess. So, and he was like, oh, you have a chessboard, let's play. And I was like, I'm going to smoke him. 3 moves in, I was like, I actually know nothing. This did not osmosis its way into my skill set as much as I hoped it would. So those would be 2 things that were interesting. I'm trying to think of so much of the research is just like little things, right? Like the sort of spot research you do about, like I read about Svalbard, which is this island sort of way up north, one of the last like pieces of civilization before you hit the Arctic. Stuff about I can't think of the word, like the spy pubs where people would rendezvous during World War II, about sort of what was going on with the forming of the SOE, about women's involvement in the war. I read a lot about female snipers in Russia, which ended up being the basis for 2 of the characters in the book. One of sort of the Winter Soldier's primary handler in the book is a former sniper, and she's based on these women who were the sort of elite snipers of the Soviet Union. And they had like it was an all-female force that were some of the deadliest snipers on the front at the time. And I was fascinated by these women, but more fascinated by like, what do you do with your life after you do this? Like eventually the war ends, and if you survive this, how do you come back from this? What is how do you exist after this? After this like deep psychological trauma that you've gone through in slow motion over an extended period of time, and just like normalized to this trauma and this high stress environment. I learned how to flip a knife for some stuff. I learned some like hand-to-hand combat for some like choreographing.
How do you practice flipping a knife without hurting yourself?
I bought a silicone knife.
Okay.
Yeah. And also I have a video of my dad and I that I really would like to post to Instagram, but he's deeply private, of him I was trying to like figure something out. There's some hand-to-hand combat midway through the book, and so I was trying to figure it out, and he like had a broom handle and was like working it out with me, and I was like, let's film it so I can watch it later so I can describe it. And he took it very, very seriously. And we were visiting his mom and his brother in rural Iowa. And I made the mistake of asking one question about like, you guys, my dad and his brother they did a lot of shooting when they were younger. And I asked like one question about marksmanship. And then both of them are the kind of people where for the next like 3 days, they're just like digging deeper and deeper. And every time, like every 10 minutes, they'd be like, have you thought about this with that? I'm like, I'm past that. I am several chapters beyond that, but they just like wanted to continue contributing.
That's so fun.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So
that's a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot of things. It's a lot of like little things like that. You never quite know what you're going to run across.
Exactly. Are there any audience questions? If you
Sure, I'll ask one. Speaking of research, when do you know you've done enough research?
You don't. You never feel like you do. One of my favorite stories about this comes from Scott Westerfeld, who wrote a totally brilliant, and most people know Uglies of his, but my favorite of his is the Leviathan series, which are these like, they're so good.
Yes.
They're like steampunk World War I. And so I remember hearing him speak about them, and he was asked sort of the same question, like, at what point do you know you've done enough research to start writing? And he was like, I spent years reading about battles and learning the minutia of World War I and the front and the theater and what everything was doing. And I finally felt like, okay, I know enough. Sat down to write and got 3 paragraphs in and went, how did they zip up their pants? Like, did zippers exist? Would they have been zipper pants, button pants, snap pants? And then just like was paralyzed for several more months about like, I did all this research and I actually know nothing relevant to what I'm writing. And I've sort of realized that if you wait until you feel like you're ready, you're going to be waiting for the rest of your life. And it's really easy to do research and feel like you're working when really you're just procrastinating starting. I mean, the trick is you have to start before you're ready and know that you're just going to have to stop and do a lot of research along the way. And you're going to spend 7 hours figuring out what kind of cutlery a hotel in London in the 1940s would have been, like what they would have served in a fake hotel restaurant for breakfast in the 1940s. And then you're going to cut that scene entirely and all of that research will have been for nothing. And that's just like, that's part of the process. So the answer is you never feel like you're ready. And I also, to drop another name, Ruta Sepetys once, I was doing an event with her who wrote totally brilliant, I think one of the best historical fiction authors working today.
Yep.
And she was telling us about, she was going to Spain to work on, at the time, her new book, Fountains of Silence. And all of us are like, oh my God, this is so cool. And she's like, yeah, I never feel like I know what I'm doing and I never feel qualified to be there. I'm like,
Like, she is literally
I know, I'm
one
like,
of
if
the best.
anyone is, and she's like, but I'm not a historian. And I was like, well, none of us. Like, but it's just about, I think it's just about like being open and curious and willing to question everything. That's the other thing, is I always get bogged down in like, what do I not know that I don't know? What do I just take for granted as being sort of a universality of human history? And then you realize, oh no, this phrase actually, like I always get caught up with Gentleman's Guide. I ran into a lot of problems with idioms, like where you use phrases that then you're like, oh no, that didn't originate since the 1890s or whatever, and you just don't even think about it because they're such common pieces of the way we speak. And so you just have to go for it and know that nobody feels ready and nobody feels like they know what they're doing, and stop procrastinating.
Yeah, there you go. Ellie, is there one online?
Yes. Shauna is asking, how does writing for a character that's pre-established differ from writing for a character you created yourself?
I mean, in a lot of ways, it's easier because a lot of the homework has been done for you.
Yeah.
And like, it's with Bucky, because I love that character so much. It was like, let's go in and identify the things I already love about a pre-existing character rather than trying to conjure something out of nothing. And often I feel like over my drafts, the characters get sharper, right? They get more finely honed. You sort of, it's the sculpting thing where it starts as sort of a rough outline, then you chisel away more and you chisel, and eventually you have hopefully something that looks human shaped. Whereas with the Marvel stuff, you go in sort of having that statue already, like so much of the work has already been done for you.
That's a great analogy.
And then you're just sort of moving them around your set. And I mean, it's great. It's tremendous fun. The problem is that the things I love about Bucky Barnes and the sort of headcanon I have and the things I have extrapolated about this character and the way I have read characterization of him is wildly different from the way other people who love this character have read it. And so the problem is I come in with preconceived notions, but readers also come in with preconceived notions.
Yeah.
And so often I don't read Goodreads. I don't really like tangle with reviews at all, but I was looking at the Goodreads page for this for some reason. And like one of the first reviews was like, well, this person, the author totally messed this up. They didn't even get the research right because don't they know that Steve and Bucky are best friends from Brooklyn? And if they're not best friends from Brooklyn in this, then they messed up the book. And I just want to be like, no, actually in the comics, they don't meet each other until they're later on. And Bucky actually grows up in Indiana and he and Steve, and like, you want to like go in and correct so bad, but they're just coming from a different piece of the canon. And they didn't like my interpretation, which was drafting off sort of different pieces of canon than they had clearly attached themselves to. And that's fine. But then you're contending with other people's preconceived notions as much as you're contending with your own. The Nebula and Gamora of it all was the best for this because they're pretty new characters in terms of their iterations in the Marvel universe. Like, and we all kind of know them from Guardians of the Galaxy, and Marvel sort of did a hard reset on them with Guardians of the Galaxy because the previous versions of them were sort of untenable. And they were that like weird 1970s space age Marvel that you just like, for feminist reasons, if nothing else, you just like can't bring forward. And so with that, it was like, we're all kind of coming to this with the same,
everybody
the same
has
understanding. With Bucky and with Loki in particular, gosh, Loki inspires a lot of really passionate fandom, which is great sometimes, and other times it's life ruining. And so I haven't interacted a ton with Bucky Barnes because the book is new. I think on the scale from Loki to Nebula and Gamora in terms of passionate stands, I think he falls somewhere in the middle. So
I love
so
that
we'll
spectrum.
we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
The Marvel scale of standiness.
Did Marvel say we want you to follow the comic books? Or
Yeah.
okay, so they said we want you to follow the comic books. They didn't say we want you to follow the movies.
The Marvel press people have an odd relationship with the movies where I think they're a little resentful of them, because it's sort of like, we've been nerds we've been reading these since we were kids. We were bullied in school for reading these, and now everyone says they watch the movies and they think they're a real fan. I think there's a little bit of like weird sort of contention in between them. So they're very much, they really wanted the books to go off the comic lore, which I was totally
because
on board with.
that was your toehold.
Yeah, because
also.
that was what got me into, and that's what made me excited about doing
Right.
more Bucky Barnes. And I think TV and film Bucky Barnes is great and fine. Comic Bucky Barnes and comic Winter Soldier are so cool, and they're so great, and they're so wonderful to read. So I was very happy to sort of draft off that. And Marvel really wanted the separation of church and state, but not every reader, or even just like things that one thing I got worried about is in the films, the Winter Soldier has the super soldier serum. This is the super soldier serum of Steve Rod. It's an alliteration.
Yeah.
But he has these like the bionic arm, but also has sort of this strength that matches Captain America.
Okay.
In the comics, he does not have that. And there's a point in the book where I very specifically call out the fact, like, no super soldier serum here. But it doesn't come in until later in the book. And so I'm very worried that people are going to read the book and be like, why isn't he punching through walls? Can't he just knock this door down? Isn't he a Superman? And it's like, no. So you do run into a little bit of sort of cognitive dissonance like that. But in the end, the best thing to do is just like pick a lane and stick with it.
Yeah.
And trust people to figure it out with you along the way. And if they don't like it, they'll put it down and write a mean review, and that's fine.
And you don't have to look
Well,
at
I know,
it.
and that's well within your rights.
Absolutely.
Destroy me on Goodreads.
Absolutely. Any questions in the audience? Anybody?
What have been some of the differences between like when you would research as a historian path versus research now? Is it just like a quieter breath, or is it different in how you do it? Or
It's definitely different how I do. So should I repeat the
You
question?
should repeat the question. Look
For
at
our
you.
friends on the internet. The question is, how is researching historical fiction books different than researching as a historian? I mean, first of all, researching as a historian, you're much more tied to truth. If I find something in historical research that fundamentally conflicts with, let's say it this way, the story always comes first for me, right? And the characters come first. So I ran into this a lot with Gentleman's Guide, where with the Montague books, you're talking about concepts of sex and sexuality in the 1700s for a modern YA audience. And if I knew that if I stuck entirely to accurate ideas and representations of sex and sexuality in the 1700s, nobody would follow me past page 20, because you would immediately either be totally at sea, what on earth are you talking about, have no way to relate to these characters and their understanding of sex and sexuality, or you'd be like, this is incredibly homophobic, and you would tap out. And so at a certain point, you have to make those compromises. So for me, it's with the historical fiction, it's more about, I want to know it. And I want to make sure that I'm not making errors out of ignorance, I'm making them out of intention. And if I'm putting in anachronisms, it's for a reason. It's because I've done the research, I know what the real thing was, and I've decided like not to use some of the terminology from the 1700s, or I've decided to sort of use a more modern view and vernacular surrounding sexuality and things like that. In terms of like the sort of minutia of researching with the historical fiction, I always start big and winnow down. Start with reading the big sort of like political, social, economic history, what's going on at the time, and then get more and more specific until you're eventually like spot researching things about like, what do you eat at a breakfast buffet at a hotel in London in the 1940s. And with the historical academic stuff, I feel like you start with, well, I guess you kind of do it the same way. Because I was going to say you start with a big sort of breadth of understanding, but also there's never, usually when you're doing like a academic history research, you have such a narrow focus anyway, that there's very rarely like an enormous breadth of understanding. It's usually like you kind of know what's going on in your one century you're focusing on, and then you know it's a lot about a little versus a little about a lot, right? And I'd rather know a little bit about a lot, which is also why I'm probably better suited to writing historical fiction than to writing my academic papers.
Awesome. We're going to do one more because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Are there any more online, Elle? There's a lot.
Uh-oh.
Okay. No, so
Can we
Friends
close?
Online, this is what we're going to do.
Ellie's gonna do one more, and then I'm gonna download all the questions and email them to Mackenzie, and maybe you can answer them on
Or
social
can we
media.
blow through a couple really fast right
Okay,
now?
we're gonna try and blow
I'll
through
be-
a couple
I'll be
really
quick.
fast.
Okay, there's two really quick fun ones.
'Kay.
And they are, you could wield any one of the Infinity Stones, which would you choose and why?
Time.
Okay. Which Taylor Swift song would you associate with this book?
Epiphany.
And then we have two slightly longer ones.
Okay.
Which of these books was the most fun to write?
The most fun was Nebula and Gamora in terms of I'd never done a sci-fi before. And it's really refreshing to not have any research to do.
Yeah.
Though sometimes I would get totally paralyzed. I'm like, somebody tell me how these giant mining rigs on fake planet work. Like somebody explain it to me in
yeah, so
research,
you
and there
have
is
to-
no
you
research.
have to make it up.
Yeah, don't like that as much as I thought I would, but it's fun. And it's, I had a really fun time doing the sci-fi elements of that and getting to build a world totally from scratch. But it's this one. It's always Bucky.
It's always
He's
Bucky.
my favorite.
And you got one more?
One last one. Are there other historical time periods or geographic locations that you're hoping to include in future books?
Oh my gosh, everything. Every day I pick up on new things. I was just over the weekend at this big botanical garden with my mom, and we did a tour, and the guide was telling us about gentleman's rose breeding competition between the British and French court in the 1700s.
Oh no, you are down
I
that
know,
rabbit
and I
hole
was like,
already,
oh
aren't you?
no. And then I asked for more information. I was like, do you have any research sources on that? And she's like, do you want research sources? I was like, yes, send me a reading list. She did not, but they have what was it called? A rose. It was like a rosarian or something that works at this garden that I was like, is it too early to get in touch with you? So the answer is yes. I want to write about everything
Okay,
all
but
the
just
time.
FYI, I
always.
do have an arboretum hookup if you ever need it.
Thank you. I'll keep that in mind.
No, seriously, and they can go. They like send things out to listservs for me.
Perfect.
So you let me
Excellent.
know.
Great. Yeah, there's
Because
so
yes,
many.
I would like you to write that
There's-
book. Like right now,
Well, and
I want
history
it.
is full of those little tidbits. And often what happens is I end up collecting tons of, like for example, the female snipers in World War II is
Right.
something I learned about years ago when I was researching Bygone Badass Broads, and they ended up not in that book, but I sort of like held on to them in my brain. And eventually you have these sort of bigger projects that kind of magnetize
Yeah.
and attract a bunch of other things that you've been storing in your brain rooms. And so that's what I kind of rely on happening, is that I'm a collector of weird little anecdotes, and then eventually hope something will magnetize and draw them all in. So the answer is everything.
Awesome. That is great. Anything else from the audience?
Yes.
If you could do a fourth Marvel book, what character would you choose and why?
Not Ant-Man. No shade, but also it's like, how are we going to sell Ant-Man as an anti-hero? The most derpiest goober in the MCU. Like I would really like to do an Elena book and do like a Black Widow's book, but again, Margie Stoll kind of already did that. I would love to do a Captain Marvel book, but there's already some of those out there. So if we're talking purely hypothetical, it would probably be like something Carol Danvers-y. But Sam Maggs already did that really well. So like, it's also fun sometimes to just like to be a reader of it and to be a consumer and not have to have sort of because like I love that I got to do this. I'm so happy I got to write about my favorite Marvel character. But also if someone else had written it, I would have been a happy reader of the
Right.
Bucky Barnes YA novel. And sometimes it's fun to just be the reader. And so as much as like there's characters I would like to write about, I'm also like, but also someone else can do that, and I can just enjoy them happily for the stretch of time I spend with them, and then not have to do all the agonizing work to create it and
Awesome.
worry I'm letting my favorite characters down and all of that. So yeah,
That's great.
not Ant-Man.
Okay, so friends online, thank you so much for being here. Mackenzie's going to sign all our books. I have all the Marvel ones. I have all the Montague ones. So if you didn't get an order ahead of time to get it personalized, you can always order signed copies, and we ship across the country and to select countries, but it's not going to be cheap.
But I'm worth it.
But you are worth it. You are worth it. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're so grateful that you spent some time with us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.